attention to what you're seeing right now. This is trail camera footage captured deep in the woods outside of Lakewood, Montana. A young blonde woman, barefoot, wearing nothing but a thin black dress, walking alone through the dense forest in the middle of the night. Watch her face. Look at her eyes. There's nothing there. No fear, no confusion, no sense of urgency. She's moving with this eerie, steady calm, like she's sleepwalking, but her eyes are wide open. Now, here's what should send a chill down your spine. She's not walking out of the woods. She's walking deeper in. And at 3:47 in the morning, in temperatures that hovered just above freezing, barefoot, with nowhere to go and no one coming to get her, whatever was happening to this woman, it was already too late. This is the story of Mila, and the man who turned her into a ghost before anyone even knew she was gone. You know that feeling on a Friday night when everything just seems to fall into place? The music's good, the people around you are laughing, and for a little while, the rest of the world just disappears. For Mila Kowalczyk, that's exactly what a night at her boyfriend's apartment was supposed to be. Just a casual get-together, a few drinks, a few friends, nothing out of the ordinary, nothing dangerous. But by the time that night was over, Mila would be gone. And nobody, not her friends, not her family, not even the police, would understand how. Mila was 22 years old. She lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of Lakewood, Montana, with her best friend and roommate, Sophie Arden. By all accounts, Mila was the kind of person who made everyone around her feel at ease. She had this quiet warmth about her, the kind that drew people in without her even trying. She was studying environmental science at the local community college, worked part-time at a bookstore downtown, and spent most of her free weekends hiking the trails around Ashwood Forest, the same stretch of woods where that trail camera footage would later be found. Her boyfriend was a man named Daniel Voss, 29 years old, worked as a pharmacist at a chain store just off the main road into town. They'd been together for about 8 months, and by March of 2018, things seemed to be going well. Mila talked about him constantly, Sophie would later tell investigators. She seemed happy, settled, like she'd finally found someone who understood her. But here's the thing about Daniel Voss. There were layers to this man that nobody in Mila's life ever got to see, and by the time anyone peeled them back, Mila was already gone. Let me paint you a picture of what that Friday night looked like. It was March 9th, 2018. Daniel had invited a handful of people over to his apartment for what he called a casual hangout. Nothing fancy, some music, some drinks, just a low-key evening among friends. Mila arrived around 8 p.m. in good spirits, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater. Sophie wasn't there that night. She'd had to work a late shift at the restaurant where she waitressed, so Mila had gone alone. About a dozen people were there that evening. Most of them knew Daniel through work or through mutual friends. A few of them knew Mila. The night unfolded the way most of those nights do. People mingled, drinks were poured, conversations drifted from one topic to the next. Nobody thought twice about anything. Nobody except one person. A woman named Carla Reeves had been at the gathering that night. She and Mila had exchanged a few words, nothing deep, just the kind of small talk you have at someone else's boyfriend's apartment. But Carla noticed something. Around 10 p.m., she saw Daniel hand Mila a drink, a glass of red wine. Nothing unusual. But Carla noticed that after Mila drank it, something shifted. It was subtle at first. Mila's eyelids got heavy. Her speech slowed down. She smiled, but it was this strange, distant smile, like she was looking at something no one else could see. Carla didn't think much of it at the time. She assumed Mila was just getting a little drunk. It happened. Everyone got a little loose at parties sometimes. Carla left around 11 p.m., said goodbye to a few people, and headed home. She never saw Mila again. By midnight, most of the guests had trickled out. Daniel later told police that Mila had stayed behind, that she'd been feeling tired, and didn't want to make the drive home in her condition. He said he'd let her sleep on his couch and that when he woke up the next morning, she was gone. Her car was still in his driveway. Her phone was on the coffee table. Her keys were next to it. But Mila had vanished. Daniel said he'd assumed she'd walked home. It wasn't that far, maybe a 20-minute drive, less if you cut through the back roads. He'd texted her that morning, asked if she'd gotten home okay. No response. He figured she was sleeping it off, maybe embarrassed about falling asleep at his place. He didn't think anything of it. And so for 3 weeks, nobody did. Sophie didn't get worried right away either. Mila had done this before, gone quiet for a day or two when she needed space. Sophie would text. Mila would eventually respond, and life went on. But by the second week, the texts weren't being answered. Sophie called, straight to voicemail. She drove by Mila's usual spots, the bookstore, the trails, the coffee shop she liked. Nothing. By March 28th, Sophie went to the police. The Lakewood Police Department opened a missing persons case. Detective Rachel Odom was assigned to the file, and within the first 48 hours, she started pulling the threads that would eventually unravel the entire case. First, she went to Daniel Voss. His account of that Friday night was smooth, rehearsed almost. Mila had come over, they'd had a good time, she'd fallen asleep on the couch, and by morning she was gone. He expressed concern, of course. He loved her, he said, and he wanted her to be found safe. He cooperated fully, answered every question, offered to let them search his apartment without a warrant. Odom searched it. Nothing out of the ordinary. A tidy place, well organized, nothing that screamed red flags. She thanked him and left, but something sat wrong with her. She couldn't put her finger on it yet. Next, she canvassed the area around Daniel's apartment, knocking on doors, asking neighbors if they'd seen anything unusual that Friday night or the days that followed. Most people shrugged. It was a quiet neighborhood. Nothing ever happened there. But here's what made it even more horrific. When Odom started digging into the missing persons database, cross-referencing Lakewood and the surrounding counties, she found a pattern that made her stomach drop. In the last 2 years, 3 other young women had gone missing from the area under eerily similar circumstances. All of them had been at social gatherings. All of them had been seen drinking before they disappeared. All of them had vanished without a single trace. No abandoned cars on the side of the road, no signs of a struggle, no witnesses seeing them get into a stranger's vehicle. They had simply walked away from their lives like smoke dissolving into air. And all 3 of them had, at some point, been in Daniel Voss's orbit. The first was a woman named Kayla Brennan, 24, who disappeared in June 2016 after attending a birthday party that Daniel had been invited to. The second was Erin Marsh, 26, gone since November 2016 after a night out with a group of friends that included Daniel. The third was Tessa Rourke, 23, missing since August 2017. Vanished the morning after a barbecue at Daniel's place. 3 women, 3 disappearances, all connected to the same man. Odom brought this to her sergeant immediately. They needed to look harder at Daniel Voss. But here's the problem. Daniel was smart, careful. He hadn't done anything overtly suspicious. He'd cooperated with police in every single one of those cases. He'd expressed appropriate concern. He'd never been the last person confirmed to be with any of the women. He was always just a peripheral figure, someone who'd been at the same event, someone who might have talked to them that night but hadn't necessarily been alone with them. On paper, he was clean, the kind of clean that made Odom suspicious in itself. While the investigation into Daniel intensified, something else was happening on the other side of Ashwood Forest that nobody had paid attention to yet. A hunter named Greg Pulowski had a trail camera set up on a logging path about 2 miles into the woods. He'd mounted it in February, trying to get footage of elk in the area for a hunting trip he was planning for the fall. The camera was motion-activated, cheap, the kind you could pick up at any sporting goods store for under $50. It wasn't high resolution, and Greg checked it maybe once every couple of weeks. He'd checked it on March 12th, a couple of days after the party at Daniel's apartment, and scrolled through the recent footage quickly on his phone. Mostly deer, a raccoon, a couple of shots of nothing at all, just the wind moving branches and triggering the sensor. He almost deleted everything without looking closely, but one clip made him pause. It was time-stamped 3:47 a.m. on March 10th. A young woman, blonde hair, barefoot, wearing a thin black dress, walking down the trail toward the deeper part of the forest. Her pace was steady, unhurried, her arms hung loose at her sides, and her face, Greg would later describe it to investigators as not right. There was no expression on it. No fear, no confusion, no awareness of where she was or what she was doing. She looked, he said, like someone who was being led somewhere she couldn't resist going. Greg watched the clip twice, felt uneasy, but didn't do anything with it. He didn't know the woman. He didn't know she was missing. He filed it away in his memory as something strange and moved on with his life. It wasn't until 2 weeks later, when Mila's disappearance made the local news, that Greg saw her photo and felt the blood drain from his face. He called the police that same night. Detective Odom watched that footage in the Lakewood PD evidence room, and she said later that it was the single most disturbing piece of evidence she'd ever seen in her career. Not because of what it showed, no violence, no struggle, nothing graphic, but because of what it implied. This woman was walking into the woods alone, barefoot, in the early hours of a freezing March morning, with an expression that suggested she had absolutely no idea she was doing it. Something had been done to her, something that had taken away her ability to think, to feel fear, to protect herself. And whatever it was, it had been administered hours before this footage was captured, which meant it had been given to her at that party, which meant someone at that party had done this deliberately. Odom went back to Daniel Voss's apartment. This time, she had probable cause for a warrant. The search team arrived on April 2nd, 2018, and they tore the place apart. At first, everything still looked clean, organized, normal. Daniel watched from the kitchen doorway as officers moved through his rooms, opening cabinets, checking under furniture, pulling out drawers. He seemed calm, almost amused. Then one of the officers opened a closet in the spare bedroom. Behind a row of jackets, pushed against the back wall, was a locked metal case. Daniel's calm didn't break, not visibly, but his jaw tightened, just slightly, just enough for Odom to notice. She had him hand over the key. He did, without protest. Inside the case were glass vials, dozens of them, unlabeled, filled with clear liquid. Alongside them was a worn leather journal, the kind you'd find at any stationery store, filled page after page with handwritten notes. Not casual notes. Meticulous clinical observations, dosages, timelines, names, first names only, but enough to match against the missing women's cases, and entries that described in disturbing detail the effects of combining certain compounds that Daniel, as a pharmacist, had unique access to. What he'd been creating was something investigators would later describe as a cocktail of dissociative agents. When combined in the right proportions, the drugs could induce a state where the person remained fully functional, could walk, could move, could even hold a basic conversation, but was mentally absent. No fear response, no decision-making, no self-preservation. The person became essentially a body without a mind, moving on autopilot while whoever had given them the drug guided them to wherever they needed to go. That's what Mila had been on that trail. That's what the trail camera had captured. A woman who was physically walking, but had been mentally switched off. The journal went further than just the drugs. Daniel had written about what he called the ritual, a process he followed each time. He'd identify a woman, usually someone in his social circle, someone without a tight-knit group of friends who would immediately notice she was gone. He'd find an opportunity, a party, a gathering, somewhere he could slip the drug into a drink without anyone watching. Then he'd wait. The drugs took about 2 hours to fully take effect. By then, most of the other guests would have left. The woman would still be conscious, still smiling, still seeming perfectly fine to anyone who glanced at her, but inside she was already gone. Daniel would then drive her, or in some cases walk her, to Ashwood Forest, to a specific trail he'd mapped out over months. He knew every inch of that trail. He knew where the cameras were. He knew where the cell signal died. He knew exactly how deep into the woods you had to go before anyone would ever find you. And on that map, found folded inside the back cover of the journal, 5 locations were marked with red circles. 5 spots along the trail, 5 women. Odom stared at that map for a long time before she spoke. He didn't hide them, she said quietly. He left them out there, in the woods, like they were nothing. The moment that journal and those vials were seized, the entire investigation exploded. Daniel Voss was arrested on the spot. He didn't resist, didn't make a scene. He simply held out his wrists and let the officers cuff him, his expression completely neutral, like he was being asked to do something routine and mildly inconvenient. Within hours, a massive search operation was launched in Ashwood Forest, targeting the 5 locations marked on Daniel's map. Search teams, cadaver dogs, forensic specialists, they moved into the woods in coordinated waves, working methodically through the dense underbrush, following the same trail that Mila had walked down in that haunting trail camera footage. At the first marked location, they found remains. Partial, weathered by months in the open air, but enough for the forensic team to work with. Dental records and DNA confirmed the identity. Kayla Brennan, the first woman who had disappeared back in June 2016. The second location gave them Aaron Marsh. The third was empty. Nothing there. Just forest floor and fallen leaves and silence. The fourth, Tessa Rourke. And the fifth location, the one closest to where the trail camera had captured Mila walking, yielded nothing. No remains, no evidence, nothing at all. 3 bodies recovered. 2 locations with no physical evidence whatsoever, which meant one of those empty spots belonged to a woman whose identity was still unknown. Someone who might have disappeared before Kayla, someone whose name might never have made it into a missing persons report. And the other belonged to Mila. Mila's remains have never been found. The forensic analysis of the vials confirmed everything the journal had outlined. The compounds were a mixture of ketamine, a powerful dissociative anesthetic, combined with other agents that Daniel had modified and synthesized himself using his pharmaceutical knowledge. The combination was, in his own words in the journal, perfect. It left no visible signs of impairment to outside observers, but rendered the person completely compliant, completely unaware of what was happening to them. Toxicology reports from the recovered remains confirmed the presence of the same compound in the systems of Kayla Brennan and Tessa Rourke. The levels matched exactly what Daniel had documented in his journal. The prosecution's case was airtight. But here's what haunted everyone involved in this investigation. The trail camera footage. That single, grainy, 32-second clip of Mila walking into the woods. It was the piece of evidence that had cracked everything open, that had given investigators the visual proof that something sinister had happened that night. And it was also the piece of evidence that would play in that courtroom, on a screen, for everyone, including Mila's family, to watch. A woman walking calmly into the darkness, barefoot, expressionless, moving toward her death without any idea that's what she was doing. Detective Odom later explained how the footage tied directly into the larger evidence chain. The timestamp on the trail camera, 3:47 a.m., matched the timeline Daniel had documented in his journal for that specific night. The location where the camera was mounted fell directly on the path between Daniel's apartment and the 5th marked location on his map. And the woman in the footage matched Mila's description exactly. The black dress she'd been wearing that evening, the blonde hair, the build, everything lined up. The trail camera footage wasn't just evidence. It was the thread that connected everything else. The party, the drug, the journal, the map, the woods. Without Greg Pulowski's cheap motion-activated camera picking up those 32 seconds, the case against Daniel Voss might have taken months longer to crack, or worse, might never have come together at all. During the trial, which began in September 2018, the prosecution laid out Daniel's operation in methodical, devastating detail. They showed the jury the journal. They played the trail camera footage. They walked them through the forensic evidence, the toxicology reports, the map with its 5 red circles. They called Carla Reeves to the stand, and she described watching Mila's demeanor shift after drinking the wine Daniel had handed her. They called Sophie Arden, who described the weeks of silence, the growing dread, the moment she realized something was truly wrong. Daniel's defense team tried to argue that the journal was fabricated, that the compounds could have been planted, that there was no direct physical evidence tying Daniel to the act of administering the drugs. It was a weak argument, and everyone in that courtroom knew it. The prosecution dismantled it piece by piece. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Then they came back with their verdict: guilty on all counts. Daniel Voss was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He showed no emotion when the verdict was read. No remorse, no reaction at all. He simply sat there behind the defense table staring at nothing, the same way Mila had stared at nothing on that trail in the woods. The charges against Daniel Voss included 3 counts of first-degree murder, 4 counts of kidnapping, 4 counts of administering a poisonous substance, and 1 count of criminal possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. The court also formally opened an investigation into the identity of the woman at the 3rd marked location, a 5th victim whose name has still not been confirmed. In the years since the trial, the case has led to sweeping changes in how law enforcement handles missing persons reports, particularly when multiple disappearances share similar circumstances. The FBI used Daniel's case as a template for a national training program on pharmaceutical-assisted crimes, teaching investigators what to look for when drugs are used to incapacitate victims in social settings. Sophie Arden, Mila's roommate and closest friend, started a nonprofit called the Mila Kowalczyk Foundation, dedicated to funding research into dissociative substances and supporting families of missing persons. The foundation has raised over $2 million in its first 3 years and has directly contributed to the development of new screening tests that can detect the kind of compound Daniel used. Mila's family has never stopped searching for her remains. Every spring, they organize a search party in Ashwood Forest, retracing the trail from the footage, hoping that one day they'll be able to bring her home. As of now, Mila Kowalczyk's remains have not been found. Greg Pulowski, the hunter whose trail camera captured those 32 seconds of footage, has said in interviews that he thinks about Mila every day. He wishes he'd looked more closely at that clip when he first saw it. He wishes he'd called someone sooner. He knows rationally that it wouldn't have changed what happened to her. By the time that footage was recorded, it was already too late. But the guilt stays with him. It's the kind of thing that doesn't go away. Detective Rachel Odom retired from the Lakewood Police Department in 2021. In her final interview before stepping down, she talked about the moment she first watched that trail camera footage. A young woman walking barefoot into the woods at nearly 4 in the morning, calm as still water, heading somewhere she would never come back from. Odom said it was the image that stayed with her longest, longer than anything else from the case, not the journal, not the vials, not even the bodies they recovered from the forest. It was that 32 seconds of video, a woman disappearing in plain sight, and nobody noticing until it was far too late. Mila Kowalczyk was 22 years old. She loved the outdoors, spent her weekends on the trails around Ashwood Forest, dreamed of studying the environment and protecting the wild places she loved. She deserved to finish her degree. She deserved to keep hiking those trails on her own terms on a sunny afternoon with the wind in her hair and the world stretching out ahead of her. She deserved a life. Mila Kowalczyk deserved so much more than what Daniel Voss took from her. In memory of Mila Kowalczyk and the other women whose lives were stolen in those woods, may they finally find peace.